So I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Shirley. She is the Director of Research at the Patanjali Yogapeeth in India. She will be covering yoga for children in the Indian scene. Yoga has shown to considerably improve the physical and mental health of children, as well as improve their cognitive skills. An ideal solution would be to introduce yoga in schools. The research's findings and reasons about why yoga is not yet a part of the regular curriculum will be discussed. So there are 18 minutes for her to speak, and after that there is a 10-minute question.
Could you talk about essentially the yoga for children in India? Now, when you talk about the situation in India today, particularly the socio-economic situation, it's rather strange. You have two ends of the spectrum: the very poor, the very rich, and a large and ever-increasing middle class. And the problems of the two groups, the poor and the middle class, are quite different and distinct, and I'm going to cover those in the next few minutes. When you look at the children who are poor, and really some of the scenes are quite horrifying and they make you feel very sad. One of the conditions which is still very common is malnutrition, and with it goes tuberculosis. There's a lot of physical and emotional abuse, child labor, exposure to drugs, sexual abuse, lack of an opportunity to improve themselves and to study, and basically a struggle for survival. We brought this out in a review which we recently published, and yoga can do something with these children. We've even done a study where we have shown that yoga is useful in the management as an add-on treatment for pulmonary tuberculosis. So maybe yoga can even help in chronic infections in a condition like this. But really, the target group is the other group, the middle class. Here the problems are that children are under tremendous struggling to perform. Academically, they're terribly competitive. Each time after the examination results are declared, there are a lot of suicides. Children are lonely because both parents go to work. And the latchkey syndrome, unfortunately, has come to India, where children actually open the house and go in and have nothing but the TV and the computer to keep themselves engaged. Because of this, there's a lot of physical inactivity, wrong eating habits because the parents aren't there to monitor, or even if they are there, they're often quick solutions like fast food. Stimulation overload, computer games and the TV, the ads. If you watch Bollywood dancing, you really know what I mean by stimulation overload. And there is an idea that fast food and a stimulation overload combined can result in conditions like ADHD, and there are studies, and I've actually supervised a PhD thesis in the University of Sydney, which has shown that yoga can help for a condition like ADHD. So I'd like to emphasize that. Bullying, cyberbullying is one of the things which has come up in North Europe, and they're particularly interested in yoga, using yoga for that. Of course, we have much more down-to-earth, face-to-face bullying in India, very much a problem in the middle class, and again a cause of suicides and a need to fit in. So increasingly in India, the middle class want their parents to go buy them brand clothes that belonging to which are branded. Well, all these are problems common to the developing and the developed world, and we believe that yoga can help in many ways. Because of this, we did a randomized controlled trial in our organization in the north of India, in Haridwar, right at the foothills of the Himalayas. We had 100 children of both genders, boys and girls, pre-teens, and we randomized them as two groups, a yoga group and a physical activity group, followed them up for 3 months, studied their physical, cognitive, and emotional skills, and we completed the trial in 2010. We did a 1-year follow-up in 2011 to see without supervision how many of them was actually practicing yoga, and we recently submitted a manuscript for consideration to the journal Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Now, a few pictures. This is how the children actually came to be tested. So we actually tested them on a one-to-one basis, and we had the yoga group, as you can see on the left side, and the physical exercise group. What's the essential difference between the two? Three differences. Yoga is characterized by relaxation, by awareness, and by a particular attention to the breathing. In physical exercise, these three components are not there. The interesting part was that when we came to the results, the physical and even the cognitive, though I have not put it here, the academic performance, which was rated by the teachers, as well as the behavior, were comparable in both groups. What the two groups differed in was their self-esteem, which is an emotional component. So we first asked the question at baseline, what were the causes of low self-esteem? And as I've already mentioned, we found that poor academic performance, that's the area in blue in the pie chart, large percentage of children actually attribute their cause of low self-esteem to not doing well in their exams. And this correlates very well with the picture we have in India of a high rate of suicides. Well, all that changed after yoga. Both their general self-esteem and parental self-esteem improved, which was good news. We wanted to see whether this made an impact on the children, and whether 1 year later, even though we did not attempt to actually follow up, because the school asked us not to, they said, let's just leave it and see how many children practice yoga. We found that 42% of their yoga group and 0 of the physical exercise group were actually practicing yoga on their own, which was very encouraging for us. Well, I'm going to now move on to some other areas. Children with special needs. I'm going to cover 3 areas here. One is children with visual impairment. This was done in Bangalore when I was part of SVASA as a randomized controlled trial. Children who are blind from birth as verified by visual evoked potentials. These children particularly love song and dance, and they have a dance troupe. And what we did was we actually randomized them as 2 groups, a yoga group and a gardening group, because they like interacting with the earth. Now, and we followed them up after a period of 3 weeks. We measured various things, but particularly the physiological measures of stress, what I'm going to stress upon in this talk. And we also assessed their other aspects of perception, like their hearing and their ability to touch, because their vision was fully gone. So we often say that the blind overcompensate other senses. And indeed, we did find that both these had improved. Their respiration, which was very irregular and very rapid pre-yoga, had reduced, and their other senses, particularly hearing, was better. And these are the journals where we had published it way back in the late 90s. The other area is a very important one. Adolescent girls in a remand home. Now, when people do an offense, particularly teenagers, this is an age where they're very changeable. And if they are put into a correctional facility, not given enough counseling, they can come out even worse than they went in, much more hardened. So we were concerned, and we took a group, we randomized them as a yoga group and a physical activity group, followed them up for 6 months, particularly looked at 2 things, their physiological measures of stress and whether they were better able to learn skills related to taking up a vocation, because most of them were school dropouts. So they'd have to do something like tailoring or something which would directly take them to some form of employment. And we found that both of these improved, and again the references. I'm going a little fast because I want to keep the 18-minute deadline. And the third group of children with special needs is a group which I felt particularly concerned for. In Patanjali Yogapeeth, we get a large number of them. They are children who come with a degenerative disease. We looked at children with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a very distressing condition, which is an X-linked disorder, passes down the boys in a family, and they rarely live beyond the age of 30. By the time they're 20, they're usually in a wheelchair, and they usually die because of failure of the respiratory muscles. It's essentially a disease of the muscles. we looked whether yoga and Ayurveda could make any difference in 16 children who we followed up for 18 months. And we found that it did. Not only did it help the children by reducing their dependence on extra aids for respiration, their mental state was more positive, few of them were in a wheelchair, but very important, the parents, particularly the mothers who suffer a lot of caregiver stress, were happier. And this, again, I've cited the reference. If any of you want any of these papers, I'll be happy to send them to you. But that brings us to the end of special needs. We look at regular children now. A few aspects: perception, motor skills, and higher brain functions. Perception, the different examples: optical illusion, for example, the lines which Dr. Nagendra showed in his keynote, Muller lines are what we've used, or you could use the Poggendorf illusion, various things. But generally, the gist of it is to say perception, or the ability to not only see but understand what one sees, improves in children in as short a period as 10 days with yoga practice. We also looked at motor skills, both gross motor skills and fine motor skills, and found that both of them improve in as short a duration as 10 days. And again, the references are here. If you want details, I'll be happy to give them to you at the end. I'm keeping a little time for discussion as was requested. Higher brain functions, we looked at various aspects like planning, spatial orientation, and I particularly like to stress spatial memory scores because I'm going to talk about that in the next 2 slides, and that's why I put it in a different color, as well as the ability to voluntarily regulate the pulse rate. We don't really think that children can do that, but they can, and they enjoy doing it, particularly if you make it a game. And it's good to teach them that early so that it's a good way of preventing hypertension and other things which can occur later on in life. Let's look particularly at spatial memory. Just to get an idea of what is spatial memory. It's a right hemispheric function which really helps us in orienting in space. For example, remembering the shape of an object, the size of an object, or more clearly or more simply put, finding our orientation in this complex, like identifying this hall, the main hall, where the restrooms are, and so on. A person like me, I've got very poor spatial memory, goes round and round in circles. A person with good spatial memory just needs to find out the hall once and knows where they are right through till the conference ends. So that's spatial memory. And we did ask certain questions, particularly does the nostril through which we breathe, because the nostrils are supposed to have an effect on the cerebral hemispheres, the left nostril is supposed to affect the right hemisphere, and breathing through the right nostril is supposed to affect the left cerebral hemisphere. So what we did find was that there is not a contralateral effect, that is left affecting the right hemisphere and right nostril affecting the left hemisphere, but we found an ipsilateral effect. And that's what we published in Psychological Reports in 1997. I put here a map because that's what spatial memory is all about. We also looked at one more aspect. We said the right hemisphere is essentially concerned with creativity, aesthetic appreciation. So if you have children in the same residential environment as like out of the city, very quiet, and you give them yoga, you give another group pottery, dance, music, are they going to develop their right hemispheric function, that is spatial memory, better? And we compared that. Which increases right memory scores more, yoga or creative activities? Given that they had exactly the same duration of time per day, we took children between the age range of 11 to 14 years, and we found that the yoga group increased, and you can see I've shown a picture of yoga, whereas the creativity group had activities like pottery and dance, And the yoga group increased spatial memory, the right hemispheric function, by 43%, while the creativity group had no change. This is particularly important because balanced right and left brain functions are what we talk about in yoga. That is the left brain, shown on the left here, overemphasis in today's education on left brain, logic, science, mathematics, very little importance given to creativity, art, appreciation, aesthetics, intuition, and so on. And that's what's said over here. I'll just summarize a few points. Modern education today tends to neglect the non-verbal form of intellect, the emotion and intuition. So don't bother to do the rest. I would like to say that when we talk, now I'm going to actually come to another part of, I'm going to summarize this and come to another part. So in summary, when we talk about the hierarchy of needs, probably the physiological needs, safety needs, love needs, this is where the parents, teachers, and all caregivers of children are so important. But there is still something that yoga can do a lot for, and that is self-esteem and self-actualization. Because really, yoga is all about, you don't need anything, it's improving yourself with nothing much more than just a mat. You don't need it even after the teacher teaches you, you may be grateful to your guru, but you really don't need anything more. I was realizing that this morning when I woke up here in San Francisco, and I've just brought my memory of what I have to practice, and I don't really need anyone to tell me. I don't need a videotape or a guide. It's all there if it stays in your head. And if a child can learn it early, there's a lot it can do to helping them later on in life. What could be the possible mechanisms? Well, we are a product of our genes, that is nature, and nurture. But fortunately, the brain, particularly among all the organs, is especially plastic. So we don't, though the brain is very rigorously controlled by genes, it is also amenable to change because of the plasticity. So nurture can do a lot. What are the factors in nurture? Nutrition, environmental stimulation, learning, social contact. All these are very important in developing the brain, and yoga is what I would like to add. What really happens, you can see from birth to 15 months to 2 to 3 years, the number of neurons does not change. It's actually the branching and interconnections between them. So maybe yoga, if you're actually doing a yoga asana, who knows, something may be sprouting in the brain. We don't know. That actually explains the increase in cortical thickness, which is being spoken of nowadays. When does this occur? Actually, the maximum change in the brain occurs in the last trimester of pregnancy, when the baby is developing inside the mother. So it's so critical for the mother to be happy. And within the first 2 years of life. This is the very important contribution of the neuroscientist Dobbing. However, the good news for us is the brain remains plastic right up to the time we die. So there's no excuse for a person to say, I'm too old to learn a new skill. We can always learn something new. And I'm concluding, hence yoga is for children, very much so. An early beginning is to promote overall well-being. As well begun is half done. Thank you.
So, yeah, we'll go ahead and collect questions.
Have you written it down?
So,
you can stand up and ask.
we can start with that. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a quick question regarding the study. The groups that you chose were a physical activity group, traditionally, and a yoga group. Did you ever also think about adding a no activity group to see the difference?
Yes, it would have been ideal. The problem is really with numbers. To get 100 children, first of all, we needed 100 children. That was what we statistically determined. And if we had to have a third group, that is a 3-arm trial, we'd have needed 150. to get 150 children who would actually carry on with the practice for 3 months would have been difficult. And the other question was, particularly because they were doing it in school, what would they do during that time? So the teachers were very clear. We did think about it. We did debate a lot of times about this. The teachers said the two reasons. One is they said, we just can't give you any more children. And we wanted more, at least 50 in each group. And the other reason was the teacher said, we don't want children just having nothing to do, or just being given, say, relaxation music or something. So that was it. But we would have liked to do it.
Because it's hard to say if it changes, what percentage changes from each of those activities.
Exactly.
There's no negative.
Exactly. Perhaps that could be a direction for further study if we get a larger school.
I know a lot of time's running up, so
I have a comment to that question, because having done many inactivity or other inactivity studies, it is virtually impossible to make children inactive. Plus, ethically, it would be impossible to impose inactivity on children. So that has to be taken into account.
Very often the research design is ideal, but the reality is different.
so I know we'll make it there a lot of time, so we can get questions.
Sure. So very quick question. So I was wondering, you showed that there was a lot of benefit to yoga as compared to physical activity. Was there anything you found that was better in the physical activity arm versus the yoga arm, like whether it was weight or body mass index or anything like that?
Very surprisingly, no. Maybe we didn't measure certain aspects like physical endurance, cardiorespiratory endurance, which could have improved in the physical activity. So the measures which we selected did include some measures of physical stamina, but they didn't include the more rigorous ones. So those might have improved. That's just a speculation.
So, yes.
Shirley, I have one question. What do you think is the reason why yoga is improving so many factors? I will tell you, for many years, I thought yoga is very good by calming down, getting relaxed, emptiness, silence, it's like this. Now, since 3 years, we have the experience with our neurological patients. They are doing PET, and by that we have the feeling that yoga improves the life force. So people start to walk, they can move lips, and so my mind has changed a bit. What is your opinion?
Yeah, exactly what I've been thinking, because in a way my research has also taken me in the same journey. At first I felt yoga was all about calming and silencing and reducing the functions, and now I find that there are a whole lot of things where people need it, and like people who are depressed or after a trauma, and it really elevates them and makes them more energized. And I really say that's not incongruous, that's very much in keeping with the basic definition of yoga. Samatvam yoga uchyate. Yoga is equilibrium or balance. So yoga, where you are low, yoga brings you up. Where you're too high, yoga brings you to a lower state.
We have 7 moments.
Okay, so 7 minutes. Okay.
So yoga for adults and yoga for kids are a little different. So what do you exactly initiate in kids? Because there is a conception that you should not initiate expose kids younger than 8 years of age to yoga. So what should be initiated and what should not be initiated?
Actually, you can start yoga very early in children. In fact, we did, from when I was still in Bangalore, in SVASA, we did do a study which was not a research study. It was more just for our own understanding about whether it would make an impact. There is a center in Madras, now called Chennai, where they actually start rehabilitation for mentally challenged children as early as 1 month after it is realized that they have a problem. For example, some children are born and they very obviously look different, like children with Down syndrome. So when the parents realize they have a syndrome like Down syndrome, where they're going to be mentally challenged, the parents take them to this center where rehabilitation begins as early as 1 month. The center is very nice, it's very attractive, there's a very positive energy there, and they stimulate the brain of the child as much as possible through attractive, colorful and toys, through nice sounds, so they bombard the senses of the child. They don't allow the brain to remain lethargic. We did add yoga, though they did have physiotherapy as well. So we added yoga in addition by positioning the limbs passively in the postures, certain simple physical postures. We found that group which did do yoga, in the sense that their parents made them position their limbs passively in the position required for a yoga posture, actually attained certain milestones quicker than the group which did not. But it's not a randomized control trial. We never published it. So I'd say as early as a month, a child can be put very gently a baby can be put into the certain postures, and it does help because the muscles, of course, keep sending signals to the brain. Regarding other precautions, of course, we never recommend the breath-holding pranayamas. The kumbhak pranayamas are an absolute no-no for children. We do not recommend inverted postures because our clinical observation is that it somehow precipitates precocious puberty. We really don't know the reason. And apart from that, the other thing is how to get a child to meditate. So if you're really trying to get a child to sit and meditate, you'll realize it's very, very difficult. And if they're children with ADHD, it's almost impossible. So what we did, particularly in Sydney, where we had children with ADHD, and we wanted them to meditate, we allowed them to chant in the beginning. So we said, just say, ooh, and it wasn't very melodious, I can assure you. They were shouting at the top of their voice, but they did calm down. And there is a physiological reason for this, because each time we chant, we are actually breathing out, and that's enhancing our parasympathetic tone, and that naturally would help in calming us down. So in fact, we're doing more research on this at present.
It's time for one more question.
Two questions. One is with the chanting, possibly also because the vagal nerve stimulation could be one piece. But thinking about sort of program continuity and sustainability, the kinds of things you're doing with early childhood or even slightly older children, are you going through a full-on yoga class where a yoga teacher is coming in, or are you extracting the essence of yoga poses connecting with the breath, but anchored in mindfulness that could be taught to the teachers themselves, the parents themselves, so there is program continuity and sustainability?
I would say we're doing the latter. We try to make the program as comprehensive as possible, and so that it is sustainable. Yes. For example, in the school in Dehradun, in Haridwar, and now we've got a school in Dehradun, the teachers have been trained and they're confident. We've actually checked the teachers' practice themselves. We brought them to the lab and checked them. And your first question was, sorry, I lost it. That's just fantastic. Okay, so thank you very much.